On Christmas, my mother-in-law tried introducing a new wife for my husband, so I revealed who really owns the house, and the room went dead silent. I used to believe that Christmas was the one time of year when even the coldest people softened a little. That no matter what had happened throughout the year, the holiday season somehow made everyone more forgiving, more human. But that belief shattered the moment I opened the golden envelope from my mother-in-law, Diane Harper. The invitation looked innocent enough. Embossed snowflakes, calligraphy letters, even a faint scent of pine. Christmas Eve dinner at the Harper estate, it read. Beneath, in her perfect cursive handwriting, were the words that made my stomach twist. Family only. For most people, that phrase would sound warm, maybe even comforting. But when Diane said family, it came with conditions, judgment, and 1,000 unspoken expectations. She'd never liked me, not from the very beginning. To her, I was the wrong kind of woman for her son, Ethan. Not glamorous enough, not wealthy enough, not polished. She used to say things like, "You're pleasant, Maya, but my son deserves extraordinary." She smiled when she said it, but her eyes always told the truth. Still, I tried. God, I really tried. For 5 years, I smiled through her backhanded compliments, endured her helpful advice, and bit my tongue every time she found a new way to remind me that I'd married up. Ethan always told me to ignore her, that she'd come around eventually. But the thing about women like Diane is, they don't come around. They circle. They wait. They plan. So when that invitation came in mid-December, I hesitated. Something about it felt different. The timing, the sudden warmth in her tone when she called to personally invite us, it all felt rehearsed. "You must come, Maya," she'd said sweetly on the phone. "This year's Christmas dinner will be unforgettable." She'd lingered on that last word, her voice silky and slow. I should have listened to my gut. I should have said no, but Ethan had looked so genuinely happy when he saw the invitation. "Maybe she's finally trying, babe," he'd said, wrapping his arms around me as I stood frozen with the card in my hand. "It's been years. Maybe she wants to make peace." His optimism was one of the things I loved most about him, and, ironically, one of the things that blinded me to what was really going on. So against my instincts, I agreed. The drive to the Harper estate that Christmas Eve felt like a journey into another world. Snow drifted lazily against the windshield, catching the glow of the headlights. Ethan was humming along to the carols on the radio, his hand occasionally brushing mine. I wanted to feel that comfort, that simple, married warmth, but something inside me was restless. I caught myself staring out the window, tracing patterns in the frost, wondering why my chest felt so heavy. When we finally turned down the long, tree-lined road leading to Diane's mansion, it looked like something out of a luxury magazine. The white columns sparkled with fairy lights, the massive wreaths glistened with silver ribbons, and the scent of roasted chestnuts floated on the air. Diane had outdone herself, as always. Everything about her world screamed perfection, control, and presentation. She greeted us at the door, her smile stretched wide and eyes gleaming. "Ethan, my darling!" she exclaimed, pulling him into a dramatic hug. Then she turned to me, her expression softening just enough to seem polite. "Maya, dear, you look festive." Her tone carried that same faint sting I'd come to recognize, the kind that dressed up an insult in velvet. I forced a smile. "Merry Christmas, Diane." The warmth inside the house hit me like a wave, the crackling fire, the faint sound of jazz, the glitter of crystal ornaments. Every detail was perfect, too perfect. There was a strange undercurrent in the air, like everyone knew a secret I didn't. A few distant relatives were already there, smiling politely, offering small talk. I could feel their eyes linger on me longer than usual. As we walked deeper into the grand living room, I noticed Diane watching me from across the room. Not with malice, but with satisfaction, like an artist admiring her own work before the big reveal. I told myself I was imagining it, that maybe I was being paranoid, but when she clinked her glass to get everyone's attention, my heart began to race. "Everyone," she said, her voice ringing with pride, "thank you for joining us tonight. This Christmas is very special to me, to our family. I have a wonderful surprise that I've been dying to share." Ethan looked at her curiously. "Mom, what surprise?" Her eyes sparkled, sharp, knowing. "Patience, darling. All in good time." Then she turned toward the hallway that led to the sitting room. "Maya, dear," she said smoothly, I think you'll especially appreciate this one." And right then, right before the sound of heels clicked across the marble floor, a chill crawled up my spine so suddenly it made me shiver. I didn't know what was coming, but I could feel it in my bones. This wasn't going to be just another one of Diane's little performances. This was something far, far worse. The moment Diane's heels clicked across the marble floor, the room fell into a strange hush, the kind of silence that feels like the air itself is holding its breath. My eyes followed her, elegant as always, every movement deliberate, her posture perfect. She stopped near the archway to the sitting room and smiled, that cold, dazzling smile she'd perfected over decades of social climbing. "Everyone," she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction, "there's someone very dear I'd like you all to meet." I turned toward the doorway. And that's when I saw her. A tall woman stepped into the room like she'd been waiting for this exact moment all her life. She was stunning. There was no denying it. Long chestnut hair that shimmered under the chandelier, a velvet red dress that clung to her like it had been made for her alone, and confidence that radiated with every step she took. She looked like she belonged in a perfume commercial, not standing in my mother-in-law's living room. Diane's face practically glowed as she walked over to the woman and gently placed a hand on her arm. "Everyone," she announced, her voice rich with pride, "this is Sabrina. She's become very special to Ethan lately." The words hit me like a physical blow. My body went cold first, then hot. I blinked, trying to process, sure that I'd misheard her. "I'm sorry, what?" I said, almost laughing in disbelief. Diane's smile widened. "Oh, come now, Maya. No need to pretend. Sabrina has been such a comfort to Ethan these last few months. I simply had to invite her. After all," she added with mock sincerity, "we're all family here, aren't we?" The guests shifted uncomfortably. Ethan stood frozen beside me, his expression caught between shock and panic. I turned to him, searching his face for denial, an explanation, something. But he didn't say a word. Not one. Sabrina extended her hand toward me, her red lips curving into a polite smile that somehow made me want to scream. "Hi, Maya. It's so nice to finally meet you," she said softly, like this was a tea party and not my public humiliation. Her voice was smooth, too smooth. I stared at her hand, then back at Ethan. "Who is she?" My voice came out steady, but it felt like every muscle in my body was shaking. Ethan swallowed hard, eyes darting between me and his mother. "Mom, what are you doing?" he said, his voice low, warning. "What I'm doing," Diane replied sharply, "is being honest. Something you two clearly haven't managed lately." "Honest?" I repeated, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear myself. "By bringing another woman into your son's home on Christmas Eve?" "Oh, please," Diane sighed, feigning exasperation. "Don't make it sound so dramatic, Maya. Sabrina isn't just another woman. She's someone who understands Ethan, someone who's been there for him when you were distracted." The words sliced through the air like ice. I felt a rush of heat behind my eyes, but refused to let the tears fall. "Not here. Not in front of her." "Distracted?" I said, voice trembling despite my best efforts. "I was working, Diane. Building a life with your son, our life. That's what you call being distracted?" She shrugged. "You were busy, dear? And Ethan has needs, emotional ones." The room seemed to spin, every face blurred except Ethan's. Pale, sweating, terrified. His silence was the loudest thing in the room. Finally, I whispered, "Tell me it's not true." He opened his mouth, but Diane got there first. "Oh, Maya," she said with a pitying chuckle, "you don't have to make this harder on yourself. Sabrina and Ethan make a lovely couple, don't you think? Just look at them." And as if on cue, Sabrina moved closer to him. Not enough to be obvious, but close enough to make the message clear. Possessive. Confident. Smug. Something inside me cracked. I stepped forward, my voice quiet but sharp enough to cut glass. "Diane, I've tolerated your little games for years. Your comments, your judgments, your constant meddling. But this?" I gestured toward Sabrina. "This is cruelty." Her smile didn't waver. "Cruelty? No, dear. It's mercy. I'm giving you both a chance to stop pretending." That's when I saw it, a tiny flicker of triumph in her eyes. She wanted this. The humiliation, the chaos, the scene. She'd orchestrated every second, every gasp, every shocked look from the guests. And suddenly, I wasn't angry anymore. I was calm, coldly, dangerously calm. I smiled, stepped closer to her, and said softly, "Then I hope you enjoy the show, Diane. Because when this is over, You'll regret ever lighting the first match." Her smirk faltered for the briefest moment. Then she laughed lightly, as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. "Oh, Maya. Always so dramatic." But as I turned away, I saw Ethan's face. And beneath all the guilt and panic, I saw something else. Fear. Not of me, but of what might happen next. And deep down, I knew he was right to be afraid. Because I wasn't planning to cry that night. I was planning to remember everything. Dinner that night felt like stepping onto a stage I hadn't agreed to perform on. Every smile, every clink of silverware against porcelain echoed louder than it should have. The Harper dining room was grand, an endless mahogany table glittering with crystal glasses and polished silver, a chandelier dripping light across 12 smugly perfect guests. And there I was, sitting across from my husband and the woman his mother had just paraded as his true match. The smell of roasted duck and pine candles twisted my stomach. Diane sat at the head of the table, glowing in her element, queen of her kingdom, her crown invisible but undeniable. Sabrina sat to Ethan's right, close enough that her shoulder nearly brushed his every time she reached for her wine. I sat opposite, smiling politely, every muscle in my face aching from the effort. Diane lifted her glass. "To family," she said, her eyes darting toward me with a hint of mockery. "And to honesty, may we all learn to embrace it." Everyone murmured awkwardly and sipped. I raised my glass too, meeting her gaze over the rim. "And to new beginnings," I said softly. The corner of her mouth twitched. For the next half hour, I endured the slow torture of conversation. Diane asked Sabrina about her career. Apparently she was a wellness consultant who helped powerful men manage stress. The irony was suffocating. Sabrina, to her credit, played her role flawlessly. Humble, gracious, pretending to be shy whenever someone complimented her. But her eyes kept flicking toward Ethan, and her hand rested too casually near his on the table. "Ethan's always been so driven," Diane said at one point, her tone falsely tender. "I worried he didn't have anyone to support him properly when life got demanding." She gave me a tight smile. "But I'm so relieved he found a friend who understands." The guests shifted uncomfortably again. I could almost hear their thoughts. Is this really happening? Ethan coughed, tried to speak, but I cut in first. "Yes, he does deserve someone supportive," I said evenly. "Someone who stands by him when things get hard. Someone who doesn't humiliate him or the people he loves." Diane's fork froze midair. The faintest flicker of irritation passed through her face before she set it down carefully and smiled. "Of course, dear. No one is being humiliated here." "Really?" I asked quietly, because it feels like someone's auditioning for the role of cruelty in a Christmas pageant. Sabrina's smile faltered for a second before she quickly masked it with a laugh. "I think you're misunderstanding." "Oh, don't," I interrupted, leaning forward. "Don't insult me by pretending this wasn't planned. You don't accidentally end up at a family dinner after being someone's comfort." Ethan whispered my name, but I ignored him. The entire table was still. You could have heard a snowflake fall outside. Diane clasped her hands together. "Let's not ruin Christmas with unpleasantness," she said, a sharp edge beneath her sweetness. "We're all adults here." "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "We are." And I smiled again. The kind of smile that makes people nervous because it's calm when it shouldn't be. Then I went back to my food as if nothing had happened. The rest of the meal dragged on like a play with too many scenes. Diane kept trying to steer the conversation to neutral topics. Her upcoming charity gala, the renovation of her summer house, the sacrifices she made for family. But the tension sat thick in the air, heavy and undeniable. At one point, Ethan excused himself to take a call, and the moment he was out of the room, Diane leaned in slightly, her tone low but cutting. "You're handling this better than I expected," she murmured. "I thought you'd storm out crying." I looked up at her, still wearing that serene mask. "And give you the satisfaction of seeing me break?" I said softly. "No, Diane. I prefer watching people reveal who they really are." Her jaw tightened. "Careful, dear. I'm only trying to help my son find happiness." I let out a quiet laugh. "No, you're trying to build his happiness, like it's one of your projects. And when something doesn't fit, you demolish it." Sabrina shifted uncomfortably beside her. The cracks were starting to show. I leaned back, folded my napkin, and set it neatly beside my plate. "But that's the thing about demolition, Diane. Sometimes the wrong person ends up buried in the rubble. Then I stood up, calm and graceful, and excused myself from the table. The silence that followed was absolute, the kind that doesn't need words to echo. As I walked down the hall toward the guest room, I caught a glimpse of myself in one of Diane's ornate mirrors. My reflection looked different, sharper, steadier. Not the woman who'd arrived here hoping for peace, but someone else entirely. And though my hands trembled as I shut the door behind me, I knew something had shifted. I wasn't going to cry that night. I was going to remember every word, every smirk, every stolen glance, because the game Diane thought she was winning, it had just begun. When I heard Ethan's footsteps outside the guest room door, I was already sitting in the dark, legs tucked beneath me on the edge of the bed, the faint glow of the fireplace painting the room in trembling amber light. I didn't bother pretending to be asleep. The moment the door creaked open, I said quietly, "You can come in, Ethan." He stepped inside, hesitating like a child caught in the middle of two lies and unsure which one to defend. His tie was gone, his hair slightly disheveled, and the weight of everything hung visibly on his shoulders. He shut the door softly behind him, but the silence that followed felt anything but gentle. "Maya," he began, voice low, almost pleading. "I'm sorry. I didn't know she'd do that." I looked up slowly. "Didn't know?" I repeated, my tone calm, eerily calm. "You didn't know your mother would bring her to Christmas dinner? The woman you've been seeing behind my back?" His eyes widened. "It's not like that." "Oh, it's exactly like that," I cut in sharply. "You just didn't expect her to expose it so early. You thought you had more time to juggle your guilt and your lies, didn't you?" He ran a hand down his face, groaning quietly. "Maya, please. I made a mistake. A terrible one. It was only for a few weeks. I was under so much pressure. Gisette, you were always working late." "Don't," I snapped, my voice trembling now, not from weakness, but fury. "Don't you dare make my career your excuse for betrayal." I stood up, facing him fully. "You think staying up late to help pay for this family was neglect? You think supporting you was some kind of punishment that drove you into someone else's arms?" He winced, looking away. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Sabrina she listened. She was there when things felt impossible." "Right," I said bitterly. "She listened. She was there. And somehow being there meant climbing into our bed while I was out fighting for us." He flinched. "It didn't mean anything." "Then why did you let her sit beside you tonight?" I demanded. "Why didn't you tell your mother to stop the second she opened her mouth? You just sat there, Ethan. You let her humiliate me in front of everyone." His voice broke. "Because I was terrified, okay? I didn't know what to do." I laughed, short and hollow. "Terrified? Of your mother? Or of losing your precious comfort zone?" He didn't answer. He just sank into the chair near the fireplace, elbows on his knees, staring into the flames like they might forgive him. The silence stretched between us until I said quietly, "You know what hurts the most? It's not the cheating. It's not even the humiliation. It's realizing that when I was fighting for us, you were just waiting for me to give up." He looked up sharply. "That's not true." "Isn't it?" I asked. "Because every time your mother undermined me, you stayed silent. Every time she compared me to her friends' perfect daughters-in-law, you laughed it off. Every time she treated me like an outsider in my own marriage, you chose her comfort over my dignity." His lips parted, but no words came. I stepped closer, my voice lowering to a near whisper. "You don't just lose someone like me because you cheated, Ethan. You lose me because you let me stand alone for years." He swallowed hard, his eyes glassy. "I know," he said finally, his voice cracking. "And I hate myself for it. Please, Maya, I'll do anything to fix this." I shook my head slowly. "You can't fix something that's already been burned to ash." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the quiet crackle of the fire and the wind whispering against the windows. Then I said softly, "You should go to your mother's room. I'm sure she's waiting to console you." "Maya, I'm not doing this tonight," I said, my tone final. "Go." He stood there a moment longer, as if searching for some trace of the woman who used to forgive him for everything. But that woman was gone. When he finally turned and left, I let the tears fall. Not out of heartbreak, but release. Every drop carried the weight of years of biting my tongue, shrinking myself to fit into his mother's image of a good wife. I walked to the window, the snow falling steadily outside, soft and cold and quiet. For the first time in years, the silence didn't suffocate me. It steadied me. That night, I didn't make promises of revenge. I didn't swear vengeance under the moonlight like some tragic heroine. No, I planned something much colder, much slower, because people like Diane thrived on control, and people like Ethan depended on it. And the best way to destroy control was to let them think they still had it. So I decided I'd play along, just long enough for them to believe they'd broken me. And then, piece by piece, I'd make them watch as everything they built came crumbling down. Over the next few days, the house hummed with the sort of polite cruelty that only people like Diane can manufacture. Meals that tasted like compliments wrapped in barbs, invitations to hearts that were thinly veiled lectures. But something strange happened. Instead of shrinking, I found myself growing quieter and sharper, like steel being tempered in a slow, secret fire. On the surface, I played my part impeccably. I smiled when Diane smiled. I accepted her small, insincere condolences about marriage being work. I nodded while she told anyone who would listen how tragic it was that people grow apart, and how sometimes life gives you second chances. Every phrase out of her mouth was a scalpel. I let it cut me while recording the angles of the wound. "You're handling this so well, Maya," Diane cooed one afternoon as she fussed with the tea service. "It's almost as if you expected it." Her eyes lingered on me for a beat too long, trying to read weakness and finding none. "Maybe I did," I replied, voice light as glass. "Or maybe I just prefer to enjoy a good cup of tea rather than a family spectacle." I set down my teacup gently, keeping my posture casual, almost bored. Her smile flickered, an involuntary twitch of irritation, and for the first time I saw her like a woman caught mid-act, the painted mask slipping for an instant to reveal the nerves beneath. Diane tried to reel me back in with gossip and gifts. A meaningful book about maintaining family harmony, a tray of cookies arranged like tiny trophies. She wanted gratitude, a public display of contrition on my part that would validate her triumph. I accepted the book with the same calm courtesy I'd reserve for a ceremonial sword. People watched for the collapse. She wanted an apology, perhaps even tears. She wanted me to beg for my place back. Instead, I learned to do something she would never expect. I began to plan with the kind of meticulous patience her control required. Where she used flash and drama, I used paper and patience. At night, I sat in our old study, the room that used to smell faintly of Ethan's cologne and the books he loved, and I made lists, not the furious, breathless kind, the quiet, thorough lists that feel like a ledger of intent. I cataloged every late-night excuse Ethan had given, every business trip that had the hollow ring of invention to it, every time Diane had offhandedly suggested a weekend away. I wrote down dates, times, and names. I scribbled notes about bank statements I knew existed, about whose credit card got swiped at which restaurant. Memory by memory, I built a map. It was therapeutic in a way, and strategic. If Diane had used spectacle to destabilize my life, I would use documentation to steady it. I called in 2 favors I'd been saving: an old college friend who worked at a law firm, and an accountant who'd once helped me with taxes. I didn't tell them everything, only that I needed someone I could trust to look over financials and marital paperwork. Both responded with the kind of quiet competency I needed. They asked no questions beyond the practical, which was exactly how I liked it. There were practicalities to tend to, too. I quietly separated our finances where I could, not through drama, but through small, unnoticeable transactions that would be difficult to reverse once in motion. New accounts opened under my name, automatic transfers set up to funnel business revenue away from accounts Ethan could touch. I updated passwords and moved sensitive contracts out of the shared hard drive. It felt petty and enormous all at once, an emotional resetting enacted through mundane bureaucracy. And I watched Diane, studied her the way she'd studied me. She was hunting for applause and certainty, and the more certain she felt, the more reckless she became. At dinner parties, she would drop hints about new chapters and fresh starts, letting the room imagine the scandal without fully understanding it. Friends who had once been neutral began to take sides, like flies sucked into the vortex of her charisma. She believed she'd won, so I fed her the illusion. At a family brunch, she leaned in conspiratorially and said, It must be so hard for you, Maya, having built a business and raised expectations. I can only imagine the strain." She smiled, pleased with herself, waiting for me to crumple. I laughed, the sound easy and warm. "It is a challenge," I said, "but a pleasant one. Everything worth building takes work." I patted her hand as one might pat the head of a small, misguided dog. Her expression soured for a fraction of a second, like a storm cloud passing an otherwise sunny day. That week, while she was busy arranging another soiree to introduce Sabrina to the extended circle, I made a discreet appointment with a divorce attorney, not to threaten or to shout, but to understand options and timelines. Knowledge felt like armor. I also booked a meeting with a private investigator, not because I wanted lurid photographs, but because I needed objective proof of things my memory could no longer be trusted to hold. I didn't announce any of these steps. I moved like a chess player setting up pins and forks, slow and invisible. There was one small cruelty I allowed myself, purely because it tasted like justice. The morning I left the house early, and the staff mistook my absence for retreat, Diane sent out another triumphant text to her social group, a smug image of her hosting so graciously, with a caption about new beginnings. I countered by forwarding a quiet, professional message to my accountant and lawyer, confirming the transfer of key assets and updated legal contacts. Nothing dramatic, but the seeds of consequence were planted. People ask me now why I didn't explode the moment they introduced Sabrina, why I let them parade a wound in front of a crowd and then retreat behind civility. The truth is simpler than vengeance. Spectacle feeds people like Diane. It makes them feel powerful. It gives them the satisfaction of watching someone smaller react. I learned early on that the best way to take away a bully's power is to stop performing for them. So I smiled. I listened to Diane's monologues. I accepted her concern. I let her believe she was grooming my exit from the picture. She polished her victory in public while I polished the instruments that would one day cut the threads of her empire. Every kind word I offered her was a note in the ledger of my patience. Every quiet meeting with a lawyer or investigator was a brick placed in the foundation of my future freedom. And beneath all that careful planning, there was another, softer thing growing, a slow return to myself. The humiliation she intended to imprint on me became the very soil from which my resolve sprouted. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to fit into someone else's story. I was writing my own, and it was terrifyingly, gloriously mine. By the time New Year's approached, the Harper Mansion had become a stage I knew too well, its corridors echoing with the sound of carefully chosen laughter, the clinking of glasses, the rustle of wealth pretending to be happiness. I could move through it blindfolded and still feel the weight of every judgmental gaze, every whisper that followed me when they thought I wasn't listening. Yet, in that same suffocating familiarity, I'd learned how to vanish in plain sight. Ethan barely spoke to me anymore, but that was fine. Our conversations had reduced to short, practical exchanges, logistics, family appearances, the bare minimum to keep up appearances. I could feel his guilt gnawing at him, but guilt, I realized, was a coward's emotion. It doesn't change people. It just makes them quieter in their deceit. Every time he avoided my eyes, I cataloged another piece of evidence that the man I once loved had dissolved completely. Meanwhile, Diane was blossoming. The success of her little scandal fed her ego like sunlight. She loved to host, to parade her perfect new family dynamic. Ethan, her beloved son, finally happy again, and Sabrina, the charming accessory who smiled too often and said too little. It made her feel powerful, invincible. The irony was that she didn't realize she was only tightening the rope I was letting her hang herself with. Because what Diane didn't know was that I'd already begun pulling at the strings beneath her polished life. Quietly, meticulously, and always with a smile. It started small. A misplaced document here, an overheard comment there. I discovered, through a few discreet phone calls and one sympathetic housekeeper, that Diane's finances weren't as untouchable as she liked people to believe. Her social events weren't funded entirely by grace and charm. They were propped up by a series of clever loans and high-interest lines of credit tied to Ethan's name. Ethan, of course, had no idea. He was too busy chasing redemption to realize his mother was using him as collateral. The realization didn't make me angry. It thrilled me. Because I suddenly saw her weakness. the one thing she couldn't afford to lose: control over her image. And I knew exactly how to take it from her. I started attending her gatherings again, dressed perfectly, composed, and radiant in a way she hadn't expected. It confused her. She thought humiliation would make me disappear, that shame would send me crawling away. Instead, I walked into every room like I owned it, not defiantly, but gracefully, as if her approval no longer held any weight. I spoke to her guests, charmed them effortlessly, and smiled when they complimented my composure. "Oh, thank you," I'd say sweetly. "Diane's been such a wonderful host through all of this. Truly, her strength amazes me." The words were poison wrapped in silk, and she knew it. Every compliment I gave her made her look smaller, desperate, because everyone could see that I was thriving while she was straining to keep her grip on the narrative. One evening, at yet another of her intimate dinners, I found myself alone with Sabrina in the study. She'd been avoiding me since the Christmas disaster, but I could tell curiosity was eating her alive. She approached me cautiously, like someone reaching for a snake they weren't sure was real. "Maya," she began softly, twisting the ring on her finger. "I just wanted to say, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you." I smiled faintly. "Of course you didn't. You just didn't mind benefiting from it." Her eyes widened, and she looked genuinely remorseful, or perhaps just afraid. "It's not what you think," she said quickly. "Diane told me things about you, that you were leaving Ethan, that you didn't love him anymore." I believed her. I leaned back, studying her carefully. She was young, not by much, but enough to still believe lies dressed as opportunity. "And now," I asked, "do you still believe her?" Her silence was answer enough. I stood and poured myself a drink, my reflection flickering in the glass of the decanter. "I don't blame you, Sabrina. People like Diane know exactly how to twist truth into sympathy. You just got caught in the middle." She frowned as if unsure whether to trust the kindness in my tone. "What are you going to do?" she asked quietly. I turned toward her, meeting her gaze with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. What I always do: smile, listen, and let people underestimate me. Later that night, I slipped away to my room and opened my laptop. The private investigator had delivered more than I'd expected. Photos, messages, transactions. Proof that Diane had manipulated not just Ethan's finances, but parts of his business ventures too. She'd been using his accounts to fund her own investments, masking her debts with his signature. It wasn't illegal yet, but it was close. A few more missteps and she'd cross the line into fraud. And when that happened, I would be ready. I organized everything into neatly labeled folders, not to expose her yet, but to hold the power she thought she'd taken from me. I was done playing defense. When I finally turned off the light, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind calm and razor sharp. I wasn't sure if I still loved Ethan, but I didn't need to figure that out yet. Love had nothing to do with what came next. This wasn't about heartbreak anymore. It was about correction. A quiet rebalancing of scales that had tilted too long in Diane Harper's favor. And as the snow fell outside again, soft and endless, I realized something profound. Sometimes revenge doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers, until the whole world leans in to listen. By mid-January, the Harper mansion had become quieter, but not with peace. It was the silence of things beginning to crumble. Conversations paused when I entered a room. Whispers followed me down hallways. Diane still wore her signature pearls and that tight, regal smile, but I could see it now. The small tremor in her hand when she poured tea, the way her laughter came half a second too late. Her perfect kingdom was starting to rot from the inside, and she didn't even know I was the one loosening the bricks. It began with subtle, almost invisible moves. I didn't gossip. I simply listened. To the house staff, to her friends, to the guests who always wanted to be closer to her light. People like Diane built empires not on kindness but on perception, and perception was fragile when fed the right kind of truth. I started by planting questions. Not rumors, never lies, just questions that sounded like concern. "Oh, Mrs. Harper's been handling so much lately," I'd say to one of her society friends during brunch. "She must be under tremendous financial stress after all those charity events. She's remarkable for keeping up appearances." The friend would nod, brows furrowing slightly. "You think she's struggling?" I'd smile politely. "Oh no, of course not. I just wonder how she manages it all. Ethan mentioned the accounts have been tight lately. By the time that friend repeated the story to someone else, my question would have turned into Diane's secret burden. Within a week, whispers of her money troubles began circulating among her peers like perfume. Then came the next string to pull: her beloved gala. The Harper Winter Foundation Charity Ball was her masterpiece, her annual act of vanity disguised as generosity. It was where she displayed her wealth, her connections, her dominance. She loved it more than anything. I offered to help her organize it. She was suspicious at first, but her pride wouldn't let her refuse. "If you think you can handle the logistics," she said coolly, "I suppose I can let you take care of the smaller details." "Of course," I said, smiling sweetly. "You can trust me." And she did. Because in her arrogance, she thought I was still broken. I coordinated with the event planner, the caterer, the sponsors, the donors. I handled everything with quiet precision, but made sure a few crucial details slipped through cracks that would lead straight back to Diane. I resent invitations with slightly conflicting times, accidentally mixed up VIP table arrangements, and let a few donors think they were being seated lower than usual. Minor mistakes, but to her high society friends, status was sacred. When complaints started trickling in, Diane's phone began buzzing relentlessly. "Maya," she snapped one afternoon, her voice sharp as broken glass. "Why are people calling me about their table placements? This is chaos." "Oh?" I blinked innocently. "I followed your instructions exactly. Maybe the planner mixed up something? I can fix it right away." She narrowed her eyes. "You'd better." I did fix it, publicly, gracefully, and without a single sign of malice. But word had already spread. Diane Harper's event is disorganized this year. The cracks widened. At luncheons, I noticed her closest friends growing colder, whispering behind napkins. They still smiled at her, but their eyes were assessing, doubting. And I made sure they had reason to. Because I'd also begun quietly feeding information, real information, to a certain journalist I'd met months before through a mutual contact. A woman who specialized in high society features, but occasionally published pieces on financial mismanagement in philanthropic organizations. I gave her just enough: copies of event budgets, donations that didn't quite match, discrepancies in expense reports, all linked back to the Harper Foundation. Nothing fabricated, just the kind of truth that sounds too scandalous to ignore. When the article dropped 2 weeks later, it wasn't explosive, but it was enough to rattle the Queen. Questions raised over Harper Foundation accounting, miscommunication, or mismanagement? Her name wasn't tarnished. Yet. But it was questioned. And for Diane Harper, doubt was poison. That evening, I found her pacing her study, the newspaper trembling in her hand. "Who did this?" she hissed when I walked in. "Who gave them this information?" I tilted my head, feigning confusion. "Information? Oh, you mean the article? I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. You'll clear it up." Her eyes flashed. "Don't patronize me, Maya. This is serious. My reputation, our family name, is being dragged through the mud." "Red? Our family name?" I echoed softly, my tone dripping with sweetness. I thought I was no longer part of that family. Her jaw clenched. She realized too late that she'd overplayed her panic. "I'll fix it," she said coldly. "I always do." "I know you will," I replied, stepping closer. "You're very good at pretending nothing's wrong. You've had a lifetime of practice." She froze, reading something dangerous in my tone. "What are you implying?" I smiled faintly. "Nothing at all. Just that. When people believe you're perfect, even a small crack looks like a canyon." For the first time, I saw it. The fear behind her poise. The realization that maybe, just maybe, the world she'd built was slipping beyond her control. That night, as she called lawyers and publicists, Ethan sat silently in his office, guilt written across his face. He'd heard about the article too. He didn't look at me when I passed by, but I could feel it. His shame was shifting. It wasn't just about cheating anymore. It was about the destruction he'd helped create. And me? I felt nothing but a calm satisfaction. Not joy, not triumph, just balance. Because Diane had spent years teaching me the art of control. She just never expected I'd learn it well enough to turn it back on her. And soon, I promised myself, her crown would fall completely. Not with a crash, but with a whisper. By the third week of January, the Harper household had lost its shine. The chandeliers still glowed, the halls still smelled faintly of polished oak and expensive perfume, but the atmosphere had shifted. There was tension in the air, tight, metallic, like the moment before a wire snaps. And at the center of that charged silence was Diane Harper, a queen realizing her kingdom was turning its back on her. I watched the unraveling begin in the smallest ways. Her phone, once buzzing endlessly with invitations, confirmations, admiration, had grown quieter. A missed call here, a delayed text there. Friends who used to send her voice notes now replied with curt messages. Doors she was accustomed to striding through now stood half shut, hesitant. Not enough to embarrass her outright, but enough to remind her that her footing was no longer secure. It ate at her. Every single day. I found her one morning at the dining table, staring at her phone as if willing it to ring. Her coffee sat untouched, trembling slightly in her hand. "They're overreacting," she muttered to no one in particular. One article, and suddenly everyone thinks I'm incompetent. I paused at the doorway, letting my voice float softly across the room. "People fear uncertainty," I said. "Maybe they're just giving you space until things settle." Her head snapped toward me, suspicion flashing across her eyes. Space? I don't need space. I need them to remember who I am. I stepped into the room with calm, practiced grace, the kind that made her twitch. Then remind them. Host something small, intimate. Show them you're still in full control. It was bait, gentle, irresistible, and perfectly disguised as support. She took it. Within hours, she was organizing a private luncheon for her closest circle of friends, as she put it. But the cracks were widening faster than she could plaster over them. Several declined with polite excuses. A few didn't even bother replying. One sent a message saying she was stepping back from public commitments for a while, which was code for "I don't want to be associated with your sinking ship." Diane was furious, but not openly. No, she folded the rejection neatly and tucked it under layers of forced poise. Yet I saw it. The tightening jaw, the stiff shoulders, the way her voice went brittle when she spoke to anyone for too long. But the real fracture came from where she least expected it. Ethan. Her golden boy, her pride, her project. He'd been her weapon for years, obedient, loyal, easily molded. But guilt had carved him hollow, and now that hollow space was filling with something new, resentment. It started small. He began skipping her morning briefings about the family business. He ignored her suggestions about responding to the article. He even canceled a dinner with one of her wealthy acquaintances without telling her. The first time she tried to confront him, I heard the argument from the hall. "You need to present a united front," she hissed. "This article makes us look disorganized." "No, Mom," Ethan snapped, his voice tight and fraying. "It makes you look disorganized, and maybe that's not my mess to clean up anymore." A beat of silence, thick and disbelieving. "How dare you speak to me like that after everything I've done?" "Everything you've done," he repeated, and I could hear the weight in those words. Exactly. When he walked out, Diane stood frozen in the doorway, her face carefully blank, but her eyes blazing with a cocktail of confusion and betrayal. She wasn't used to losing control, not over her reputation, not over her son, certainly not over the narrative. Sabrina, meanwhile, was folding under the pressure. She'd come into the Harper world thinking she was stepping into glamour, influence, security, but all she found was tension and the slow burn of a dynasty collapsing. I found her crying quietly in the guest bathroom one evening, mascara smudged, shoulders trembling. "She blames me," she whispered when I gently asked what was wrong. "For the article. For everything. She keeps asking if I said something to someone. I swear I didn't. I swear." I rested a soothing hand on her back. "Diane is looking for a scapegoat," I murmured. "She always does." "It was never your fault, Sabrina." She looked up at me with such desperation it almost made me feel sorry for her. Almost. Because while she was a pawn in Diane's game, she had still stepped willingly into my life and tried to wear my place as if it belonged to her. Her tears didn't erase that. But they reminded me of something important. Diane wasn't just losing control of me. She was losing control of everyone. As her world tightened around her, she began making mistakes. Public ones. She snapped at a donor during a brunch. She contradicted herself in a meeting about the foundation's finances. She sent a poorly worded email that got screenshotted and circulated in her social circle within hours. The Queen was stumbling, and her court was watching. By the end of that week, She invited me into her study late at night. Unusual for her. She stood at the window, back straight but shoulders heavy, like a monarch surveying a battlefield she never expected to fight on. "Maya," she said quietly, not turning around, "be honest with me. Do people think I'm failing?" It was the first trace of vulnerability I'd seen from her in years, and I knew exactly how to use it. I approached slowly, softly, carefully. The way one approaches a wounded animal that still has sharp teeth. "They're uncertain," I said gently. "Not because you've done anything wrong, because uncertainty scares people. They don't know which direction things are going yet." "But I've always led," she whispered, voice trembling. "I've always been the one they followed." "And you still can be," I replied. "But you have to stop fighting every shadow. People need stability, Diane." Calm, a steady hand. She finally turned to me, eyes glassy but defiant. "Do you think I can fix this?" I smiled softly. "With the right support? Yes." And in that moment, she relied on me, trusted me, in a way she never had. She didn't realize she was leaning on the very person pulling out the foundation beneath her feet, because this wasn't revenge anymore. This was exposure, revelation, correction. Diane Harper was losing her crown, and I was the quiet wind that kept knocking it off center. And soon, it wouldn't just slip, it would fall. The next morning, I woke up before Ethan. I didn't sleep much, but strangely, I didn't feel exhausted. Instead, I felt steady, focused, like my brain had shifted into survival mode, the kind of clarity that only comes after you've cried everything out and there's nothing left but determination. I slipped out of bed quietly, trying not to wake him, and went downstairs to make coffee. For the first time in days, the house was quiet. No clinking dishes from Monica, no perfume cloud following Dahlia around, no forced cheerfulness, just silence. Heavy, tense, but mine. As the coffee machine hummed, I replayed Ethan's words from last night. I want our marriage back. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted it more than anything. But trust doesn't grow back overnight. It doesn't magically heal just because someone says the right sentences. And even though his apology felt real, the wound was still fresh, pulsing under the surface. When Ethan finally came downstairs, he looked tired, like he'd dreamed of everything he said and was terrified I'd wake up regretting giving him another chance. He hesitated in the doorway, like he wasn't sure if he should come closer. "Morning," he said softly. I nodded, pushing a mug toward him. "Morning." He took it, but didn't drink. He just stared at me the way someone stares at something they're afraid of losing again. Something they know they can't break a second time. "Last night wasn't just emotion or panic," he said quietly. "I meant every word. I want to fix this. But I know that means I have to earn your trust back. I'm ready to do whatever it takes." His voice was steady, but there was a crack in it that told me he wasn't pretending. It made something in my chest loosen. Barely, but enough to notice. "I need time, Ethan," I replied. "Time and consistency. And I need to see that you'll actually put boundaries in place with your mother. Real ones, not temporary ones you make when you're angry, but forget once things calm down." He nodded immediately. "I will. She crossed a line. I should have stopped her before it got to this point. I see that now." I watched him carefully. "So what do you plan on doing?" He inhaled, steadying himself. "First, I'm not going to the family New Year's brunch. Not without you. Not when you're not comfortable. Like, if we don't go together, I'm not going." That stunned me a little. Ethan never skipped a family event. Not once in all the years I'd known him. Even when he had a fever, he'd drag himself there because Mom will be disappointed. I leaned back. "She won't like that." "That's not my problem anymore," he said, and there was a firmness in his tone I hadn't seen in a long time. "And I'm going to tell her the truth, not the softened, polite version. I'm going to tell her exactly what she caused, what she almost cost me." The thought of Monica hearing that brought a small, unexpected satisfaction. He hesitated, then added, "And I'm blocking Dahlia's number." That one hit even deeper because it confirmed something I'd suspected without saying out loud. Dahlia had been contacting him more than I knew. I blinked slowly. "You still had her number?" He winced. Guilty, ashamed, but honest. "Yes. I didn't delete it because I didn't want to make drama at the time, but that was stupid. I'm deleting it today. In front of you." I nodded. "Thank you." We drank our coffee quietly after that. It wasn't awkward silence, more like rebuilding silence. Two people standing on shaky ground, trying to see if it could support them again. A few minutes later, Ethan reached for my hand across the counter. Slowly, gently, as if asking permission rather than assuming it. I let him hold it, and he exhaled like he'd been holding his breath since last night. "I love you," he whispered. "I know," I said, "but I need to feel safe with you again." "You will," he promised. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't immediately doubt him. But neither of us knew that Monica had already started spinning a story the moment she left the house. A story that would twist everything we said, everything we felt, everything we planned, into something far uglier. And that her next move would hit harder than all the previous ones combined. 2 days later, just when things between Ethan and me were starting to feel cautiously steady, like a house rebuilt on repaired beams, not new ones, the world decided to test the structure, hard. It started with a phone call, not mine. Ethan's. He had just come home from a short grocery run, arms full of bags, cheeks pink from the cold. I was in the living room sorting laundry when his phone rang in his pocket. He checked the screen and froze. "It's my aunt," he said, sounding confused. "She rarely calls," he answered, and before I could even glance over, her voice blared so loudly through the speaker that I could hear every word from across the room. "Ethan, what is going on?" she shrieked. Ethan flinched. "Aunt Marie?" "What?" "I just got off the phone with your mother," she continued dramatically. "She said you and Lila have separated." She told us Lila ran out crying on Christmas because she's unhinged and unstable. She said you're staying with her for your own safety. My heart stopped. Slowly, like someone waking from anesthesia, I turned to look at Ethan. His eyes had widened, furious and disbelieving all at once. "What?" he barked. "That's a lie, Aunt Marie. We're not separated. I'm literally at home with her right now." "I figured something wasn't right," his aunt rushed on. "But your mother sounded so upset, so heartbroken. She said she's worried you'll never have the courage to leave your toxic marriage for good." I felt heat rise to my face. Hot, humiliating, trembling heat. Toxic marriage. Unhinged wife. He needs protection from me. This wasn't just meddling. This wasn't her usual passive-aggressive disapproval. This was character assassination. Ethan closed his eyes, visibly fighting to keep his voice steady. "Aunt Marie, none of that is true. None. Mom is lying. Manipulating. I need you to trust me." "I do," she said gently. "But Ethan, your mother told every relative who would listen. Some of them are already telling their friends. It's spreading." My stomach dropped. "She what?" Ethan whispered. "Everyone thinks Lila had some sort of meltdown. People are whispering about mental health, infidelity, all kinds of nonsense. I thought you should know." I felt physically sick. The aunt gave a shaky sigh. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have believed her. I just didn't want to assume." She trailed off. "You two take care of yourselves, okay? And please, set your mother straight. This isn't right." When the call ended, Ethan didn't move. He didn't blink. He just stood there, fists clenched at his sides, jaw twitching like he was holding back a scream. "Lila," he finally said, voice low and shaking, "my mother is trying to ruin your reputation." I swallowed hard. "Not just mine, ours." He nodded, slow, stunned, furious. She told the entire family that you're mentally unstable, that I'm unsafe, that we're separated." "And they believed her," I whispered, hugging myself. "Because she's their Monica. The woman who bakes pies for church, the woman who volunteers at shelters, the woman who plays the victim so convincingly it should be illegal." Ethan paced the room, running a hand through his hair. "I can't believe this. How could she?" He cut himself off with a choked, bitter laugh. "No, I can believe it. I just didn't want to." The betrayal hit him differently. For me, it was rage. For him, it was grief. He sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. "She's trying to isolate me. Make everyone think you're the problem so she can push you out of my life." "That's exactly what she's doing," I said softly. He looked up at me, eyes red, breath unsteady. "I won't let her. I swear to you, Lila, I won't let her destroy you. Or us. This ends now." But just as he said that, his phone chimed again. Another relative. Then another. And another. Calls, messages, missed calls, voicemails, all variations of, "Is everything okay? Your mother told us everything. We're praying for your safety. You're so brave for leaving." Ethan stared at his screen like it was burning him. "This is a smear campaign," he whispered. "My own mother is smearing the woman I love." He didn't wait another second. He stood up abruptly, grabbed his coat, and said, "I'm going to her house." I froze. "Ethan, wait. I'm not going to yell," he said. "I'm going to tell her the truth. My truth. Our truth. And then I'm cutting her out of my life until she fixes what she broke." My pulse hammered. Part of me wanted him to go. Part of me wanted him to stay. But I didn't stop him, because his face, determined, devastated, done, told me he needed to do this. He kissed my forehead softly. "You are my family," he whispered. Then he walked out the door. I had no idea what he was walking into. And neither did he, because Monica was already waiting with her next manipulation primed and ready. Ethan drove to his mother's house with a kind of quiet fury I hadn't seen in years. Not anger that flares hot and burns out fast, but the cold, focused kind. The kind that comes when you finally accept something ugly and irreversible. He didn't call her on the way. He didn't send a warning text. He wanted to confront her face to face, where she couldn't pretend she misunderstood, couldn't twist it into a martyr story before he even arrived. Meanwhile, I paced the living room at home, replaying every scenario of how the conversation might go. Would she cry? Would she gaslight him? Would she pretend to faint like she'd once done when Ethan disagreed with her about something trivial? The sickening truth was that nothing was too dramatic for Monica when her control was threatened. When Ethan finally pulled up to her house, he told me later, he could already feel the manipulation radiating off the place like humidity. Christmas decorations were still up, overdone, excessive, like a Hallmark fever dream, lights blinking, garlands everywhere, as if she'd staged the house to look like a victim's sanctuary. He knocked. No answer. He knocked again, harder. Still nothing. He was about to knock a third time when the door suddenly cracked open just enough for one eye to appear. Dahlia. Not Monica. Dahlia. Her voice floated through the crack, soft and syrupy. "Oh, Ethan, I didn't expect you." He stiffened. "What are you doing here?" "I came to check on your mother," she said, pressing a hand to her heart. "She's very upset. She said you yelled at her and left abruptly on Christmas. She hasn't been herself since." Then she added in a whisper meant to sound compassionate, "She's just worried about you, about your safety." Ethan almost laughed, not out of humor, but disbelief. "Move," he said coldly. Her eyes widened, like she couldn't believe he was speaking to her that way. "Ethan, I think you should calm." "Move, Dahlia," he repeated, voice low and dangerous. "Now." She stepped aside with exaggerated reluctance, like he was being hostile. The house smelled like perfume. Hers, like she'd been there all morning, maybe longer. Ethan walked in and found Monica sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, holding a mug like she was an abused heroine in a Victorian novel. She looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes that were suspiciously clear and dry. "Ethan," she whispered, voice trembling. "I didn't think you'd come." He crossed his arms. "Cut the act." Her lip quivered. "Act. Ethan, I'm devastated. I've been worried sick since Christmas. I told you that woman was emotionally unstable. Stop." His voice cracked like a whip. "Do not talk about my wife that way." She blinked, truly startled for a second before the mask slipped back into place. "I'm only trying to help you, sweetheart." I heard her screaming. "I heard from half the family that you told them Lila and I separated," he interrupted, stepping closer. "That she's unstable, that I'm staying with you for my safety, that she had a breakdown." Monica's face shifted, just barely a flicker. Surprise? Fear? Or calculation? Then she frowned, all innocence. "I never said that." But her tone wavered. "Yes, you did," Ethan said bluntly. "Aunt Marie called. Uncle Rob called. Even Cousin Jenna messaged. You spread a story about my wife that wasn't true." "I was worried about you," she insisted. "I didn't know if you were safe with a woman who storms off and slams doors." "Are you insane?" Ethan snapped. "She left the room because you kept pushing another woman in my face. You introduced Dahlia like she was my girlfriend. You humiliated my wife on Christmas. And now you're spreading lies to justify it?" Monica's hand flew to her chest as if offended. "Ethan, I did nothing wrong. I was simply presenting options. Your marriage seemed so strained, and Dahlia has always—" "Stop using her name," he roared, startling even himself. "Dahlia is not an option. She is not family. And she sure as hell isn't your replacement daughter-in-law." Dahlia flinched in the doorway, face mottled with equal parts embarrassment and rage. Monica straightened suddenly, and all the softness drained from her expression. Her voice hardened. "I'm your mother. I will not be spoken to like this in my own home. And I'm your son, Ethan shot back. And you don't get to ruin my marriage because you want to feel important. Silence. Thick. Tense. Then Monica did what she always does when cornered. She weaponized tears. She burst into loud, dramatic sobs, clutching the blanket around her shoulders, gasping like she was being strangled. "Oh my God," Dahlia cried, rushing to her. "Ethan, what have you done? Look at her. She can't breathe." Monica moaned, "He's attacking me, verbally attacking me." Ethan closed his eyes, exhaling sharply. "I'm not doing this anymore." His voice was tired, strained, done. "I'm leaving. But hear me very clearly. If you do not call every single person you lied to and tell them the truth, the real truth, I will go no contact, completely and permanently." Monica froze. Her tears stopped mid-breath. Her expression stilled, not sorrow, but pure shock. She never imagined he'd say it. She never imagined he'd choose me over her. She never imagined he'd finally see through her. Ethan walked toward the door. Dahlia followed him, hissing under her breath. "She's your mother, Ethan. You can't just cut her out." He stopped, looked at her with a coldness she'd never seen from him, and said one sentence, low, steady, final: "Stay out of my life." Then he left. But what Ethan didn't know was that the moment his car pulled away, Monica made a phone call. Not to apologize, not to take responsibility, but to escalate. To someone Ethan never thought she'd involve. Someone who would take her lies and formalize them. Ethan came home that afternoon looking drained. Physically, emotionally, spiritually. Like the confrontation had taken pieces out of him, he didn't have to spare. When he stepped through the door, his shoulders sagged with the weight of everything he just walked away from. He didn't speak at first. He just came to me, wrapped his arms around my waist, and pressed his forehead into my shoulder like he needed to be close to something real, something that wasn't twisted or manipulative or trying to shape him like clay. I held him without asking a single question. He finally whispered, "She's worse than I thought." I didn't say, "I told you so." I didn't need to. We sat together on the couch, his head resting against the backrest, mine on his shoulder, both of us silent. The kind of silence that lives in couples who've been through war zones, both together and against each other, and are now trying to stitch the wounds shut. I rubbed his hand gently. "How did it go?" He let out a shaky laugh that wasn't humor at all. "She played the victim, claimed she never said anything, then cried like I'd accused her of murder." I sighed. "And Dahlia?" "You don't want to know," he muttered. "I did. But I didn't push. Some truths don't help. They only add flames to a fire already burning too hot. But something in the air felt strange, heavy, charged, like the storm wasn't done yet. And I was right, because barely an hour later, there was a sharp, unexpected knock at the door. Not polite, not hesitant. Firm, authoritative, final. Ethan and I exchanged a confused look. He stood up cautiously and walked to the door, peeking through the peephole. He froze. "What?" I whispered. He didn't answer immediately. He opened the door. Standing outside were two uniformed officers. My stomach dropped so violently I felt nauseous. "Good afternoon," one of them said, voice neutral. "We received a call regarding a domestic concern. We'd like to ask a few questions." Ethan blinked. "A what?" "A concern for safety," the officer clarified. I stepped closer. "Is this a welfare check?" "Yes," the second officer said. "A caller expressed fear that your husband may be in danger at home." My heartbeat pounded in my ears. No. No. She wouldn't. She wouldn't. But she did. And I knew it with absolute certainty in that exact moment. Not from evidence, not from logic, but from instinct and experience. Monica had called the police. She had escalated her lies from gossip and family manipulation to authorities. Ethan immediately stepped forward, holding up his hands slightly. "Officers, I'm fine. Completely fine. My wife hasn't harmed me, threatened me, or put me in any danger. There must be..." The first officer raised a hand calmly. "Sir, we understand. However, once a call of this nature is logged, we're required to follow through. May we come inside?" I felt exposed, violated, scared, not because we were guilty of anything, but because Monica had weaponized the system with ease. If she could twist the truth to relatives, she could twist it to police. But Ethan nodded and stepped aside. They entered. I sat on the edge of the couch, hands trembling despite myself. One officer spoke to Ethan. The other spoke to me separately. They asked routine questions. Has there been any fighting? Any threats? Any physical altercations? Do you feel safe? Every answer was the same. Yes, yes, yes. We were calm, polite, transparent. But the humiliation burned through me. This wasn't just meddling. This wasn't just gossip. This was character destruction on an entirely different level. After assessing everything, checking the environment, and determining the call was unsubstantiated, the officers exchanged a knowing look. All right, the first said gently. We're going to close this as a false alarm. But if anything changes, or if you feel harassed by whoever made the call, you're welcome to file a report. Ethan nodded stiffly. Thank you. They left with professionalism, but even after the door shut, their presence echoed in the house. A residue of shame and disbelief lingered like a bad smell. Ethan turned to me slowly, eyes blazing. She called them, he whispered. My mother called the police on you. His fists clenched. His voice dropped to something dark, something I'd never heard from him before. This was her line, he said. This was her final chance. She crossed it, and now I'm done. I swallowed, throat tight. But the nightmare wasn't finished. Not yet. Because the next morning, we woke to a new wave. Voicemails, messages, emails, and one particular text that made my blood run cold. I heard the police were at your house last night. Are you safe? From Dahlia. She knew. She knew before anyone else did. They weren't just meddling. They were working together. When I saw Dahlia's text on Ethan's phone the next morning, something inside me snapped. Not loudly, not violently, but with a cold clarity that settled deep in my bones. She knew. She knew police had come before anyone else. She knew because either Monica told her, or she was part of the call. Ethan stared at his phone, jaw tightening with every second that passed. He didn't reply. He didn't even breathe normally. He just said she wasn't guessing. Someone told her. Someone who wanted her involved. We both knew who that was. Before either of us could fully process the weight of it all, Ethan's phone started lighting up nonstop. Texts, calls, missed calls. All from his mother. Mom, Ethan, please answer. We need to talk. I didn't mean for things to go this far. You can't shut me out over a misunderstanding. I'm your mother. You owe me a conversation. But the tone was wrong. Not apologetic, not remorseful. Panicked, afraid, frantic. Because she knew the police had reported the call as baseless. She knew her version was crumbling. And she knew Ethan was finally past the point of being manipulated. He didn't answer. But then, she escalated again. A long, desperate voicemail arrived. We listened to it together. Her voice trembled. Ethan, sweetheart, I made the call because I thought you were in danger. Dahlia was worried, and when you stormed out the other day, I feared the worst. I didn't lie. I reacted out of love. Please don't punish me for caring about you. I felt the hairs on my arms rise. Dahlia. Dahlia. Again. Her name woven into every excuse. When the message ended, Ethan let out a slow, controlled breath, the kind that comes right before a final decision. I need to end this, he said quietly. Not just respond. End it. End it how? I whispered. With boundaries she can't manipulate her way around. With consequences. There it was. The shift. The line drawn in concrete. He didn't wait. He grabbed his keys. I'm going with you, I said. He didn't argue. The drive to Monica's house felt different this time. Not tense. Not anxious. Final. Ethan's grip on the steering wheel was steady, his breathing calm, his voice firm when he said, She won't control our story anymore. She won't make you the villain. Not in my family. Not in my life. When we pulled into her driveway, Dahlia's car was there. Of course it was. Like a parasite clinging to something rotten. Ethan didn't bother knocking this time. He rang the doorbell once, then opened the door when Monica answered. Her face pale, eyes swollen, wearing a robe like she'd been rehearsing the victim role in the mirror. She froze when she saw me beside him. Before she could speak, Ethan said, Don't start acting. Don't cry. We're here to talk like adults. Monica blinked rapidly. I never meant for any of this to hurt you, sweetheart. You called the police, Ethan cut in. You told them you feared for my safety, that Lila was dangerous. That's not what I said, Monica whispered. I said I was worried. You lied, Ethan said, voice low but powerful. And you lied to the entire family. You tried to destroy her reputation so you could justify pushing her out. You involved Dahlia. You turned a private argument into a public smear campaign. Dahlia stepped out of the kitchen, arms crossed. We only wanted to help. Ethan turned on her so fast she stumbled back a step. No, you wanted me to doubt my marriage. You wanted to replace my wife. You showed up on Christmas like you were auditioning for the role of spouse, and you encouraged my mother's delusions. Dahlia's face cracked, anger bleeding through her fake sweetness. Your mother deserves better than being shut out of your life for some. Ethan lifted a hand sharply. Say one more word about her, and I'll get a restraining order. Dahlia's mouth snapped shut. Monica gasped. Ethan, you would never. I would, he said. I will. If you or Dahlia ever interfere in my marriage again, spread one more rumor, call one more authority, or show up uninvited at our home, it's done. Legally done. Monica's face shifted, victim to shock to anger. You're choosing her over your own mother, she whispered. I'm choosing my wife, Ethan said. The woman I vowed to protect. The woman who has never lied to me, manipulated me, or tried to sabotage my relationship with you. You did this, Mom. You. And unless you fix every lie you told, every single one, you will not be part of my life anymore. Silence. Cold, heavy, stinging. Monica's eyes darted to Dahlia as if begging her to intervene. But Dahlia looked away, suddenly aware that Ethan was no longer someone she could influence. Finally, Monica whispered, I didn't realize it would go this far. You did, Ethan said quietly. You just didn't think you'd get caught. Her face collapsed, not in guilt but in the realization that her control was gone. Ethan reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and handed it to her. This is the number for every relative you lied to, he said. You will call them. You will tell the truth, you will undo the damage you caused, and then you will give us space until we decide to reestablish contact. And if I don't, she asked, voice trembling. Then this is goodbye, Ethan replied. Not a threat, a promise. He took my hand and squeezed it, and we left. The calls happened. Slowly, awkwardly, resentfully, but they happened. One relative after another reached out to apologize, shocked and embarrassed by the lie they had believed. Dahlia tried to message Ethan twice. He blocked her. Word spread through the extended family, and her reputation sank faster than her intentions. As for Monica, she stayed silent. Weeks passed, then months, until one day a short message arrived. I'm ready to apologize when you're ready to hear it. Ethan didn't respond right away, but he looked at me, took my hand, and said, We'll decide together. And that was the real victory. Not breaking the connection, but taking back control of the boundaries. Taking back the narrative, taking back our peace, together.